Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Thunderstock Show. It's a collection of valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, your liberty, your pursuit of property. This season is all about the EOS journey. We're going a different route, one near and dear familiar to me, with Raj. If your marketing is a mirage, you should call Raj Kapur, founder of And Marketing. First time I met you, Raj, for everyone to share this quick story, we were actually co-guests on a podcast. And that was a couple years ago. And here we are in Provisor circles and all the good things. So pleasure to have you on. I've been wanting to talk to you on a podcast for quite some time. Thanks for making the time.
Yeah, absolutely, Ross. Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to the discussion.
Now, Raj, the hilarious question is, so did you always want to own a fractional CMO agency when you were growing up? Like when you were in elementary school, I was like, I'm going to be a fractional CMO agency owner.
I don't think so. Yeah, my backstory. So I'm an immigrant of this wonderful country. I moved to the U.S. when I was about 5 years old, and I've been here for 40 plus years. So you can do the math. So when I was little, I wanted to be a doctor, and there's probably some cultural nuance and implications there. So I went to college. I have a degree, Bachelor of Science in biology, pre-med, all that stuff. And then about my sophomore year, I realized I hated it. And I was good at it, but I didn't really enjoy it. And I certainly couldn't imagine going to med school and doing the MCATs and all that kind of stuff. So I switched to sales and marketing. My true passion was marketing. So my first job out of undergrad was sales. And then I went back to business school, got a marketing degree, started my marketing career. And then about 8 years ago, I left corporate America and started a marketing agency or a marketing company. And then about 3 years ago, we pivoted that business as the fractional CMO trend was emerging. We pivoted towards a fractional CMO model. And now that's probably about 60 or 70% of our business. And we still have what we would call an agency that does the in-house work a little bit on it as well.
Okay, so interesting.
Okay.
My father, who, pretty close with growing up, still close with this day, he went to school for pre-dental to be a dentist. Okay. And made it like maybe 2 semesters before he's like, this is not it. So you made it a little bit further through the schooling. And what was the moment where you're like, this is not me, it's not happening? Was it clear, or did it take like a certain course or a certain moment where you're just like, gotta pivot, absolutely not, this is not my career path? And how did your family and your environment react to that decision?
Great question. Yeah, sure. So it wasn't one single moment. It was probably a confluence of a bunch of different things. So in particular, I was a science major, but everything I did with I was super involved in college. So I was very involved in my fraternity. I was the rush chairman for my fraternity. So recruitment chair is the official name of it, but basically that's a sales job. And then I was really involved on campus activities, and all of them tended to navigate themselves around sales and marketing. And what I realized was that was fun and interesting, and the actual coursework I was doing was a grind and boring. So I did the one because I had to, and I did all the other stuff because I wanted to. And I said, wait a second, what am I doing? And I said earlier, there's probably some cultural things that made me want to be a doctor or whatever. It wasn't actually true because both my parents are MBAs. They actually met in business school. So that's how they met. So my dad's a marketing person, gone on to finance and other things. My mom's an HR person. And so when I said that, they were like, okay, fine, just do something else. Like, we don't care. We just, like good parents, they just want you to be happy. So that a lot of that was like mud in my own mind, but it was like over time. And you go to a 3.5 hour biology lab that's super important if you're going to end up your life dissecting things. But if you're going to go sell Cheerios like I did, it's really not that important. And so that just happened so many times in a row that I was just like, all right, let's make a career of it. The pivot was relatively easy for me because even though I wasn't in the business school at my university, I had all of these great sales-like examples. I'm naturally an extroverted person. So I'd go to these, information sessions, I'd ask questions, and they're looking for salespeople. And that was, relatively straightforward for me. So that was a good start to my switch from the science world to the sales world.
Yeah. To tease EOS when it comes to the sales seat, it's a unique seat where it requires some sort of DNA or personality trait, much more so than any like certifiable degree or credential, like on paper. It's like you can either perform the activity consistently, relentlessly, in spite of setbacks, or you can't. And there's some training, and there's a lot you can do to train and get better at it. But if you're someone that hates rejection and is afraid to talk to people, good luck, So it seems like that wasn't your problem. And you mentioned about selling Cheerios. Your first it looks like your first thing afterwards was GM, like General
General Mills,
Mills.
yeah. I was a salesperson at General Mills. So literally my job was to sell Cheerios. That was my job.
I'm speechless. So I guess my question is like, if you could sell Cheerios, I honestly think that might be one of the hardest things to sell. I mean, mass consumption, lots of people are familiar with it, but like you've gotta make it. I don't want to say sexy, but like, how do you make Cheerios appealing?
Well, that's a different type of sale, right? So when you're selling, quote unquote, selling Cheerios or selling whatever General Mills has in their basket, it's not really selling somebody a box of Cheerios. What you're
Right.
doing is you're selling it to an account that already carries it, and you're working with them to sell it more. So consumer packaged goods, obviously a lot of people who are listening to this are very familiar with the industry. You're not
Right.
selling it to like the consumer at the end of the day. You're not saying,
Mm-hmm.
hey, buy these Cheerios or whatever. What you're doing is you're working on long-term established relationships with these retailers and trying to get fractions of sales increases here or there, right? So our big competitor is or was Kellogg's. I don't work at General Mills anymore, but like Kellogg's has certain strategies. They have certain brands they're trying to promote. We have ours, and we're always in this sort of battle. And there's obviously other competitors and things like that. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to stay on trend. Sometimes Cheerios and cereal is totally on trend. Sometimes it's totally off trend. Sometimes low carb becomes popular and cereal goes away. Like there's a lot of that type of stuff happening. So your job as a salesperson is to almost educate and build a relationship with the retail buyer, and then over time get them to grow. Like so, in some cases, in some years, a 2 to 4% sales increase is huge because it's I called on Kroger. So think about all the thousands of stores that Kroger has. And so if they sell 2 or 4% more Cheerios than they did last year, that's many millions of dollars. So it's a very different type of sale than like you and I in this world, it's B2B. You're usually talking to an owner, you're trying to convince them to buy something. It's a very different sale, but I would actually argue, I think what you're saying is true, is that the core DNA and the attribute of it is really important. I also think, as an aside, I also think it's a common misnomer that extroverts make better salespeople.
I agree.
What I've found, and through a lot of training for myself, is actually the best listener makes the best salesperson, right? Because sometimes, oftentimes, if you're too busy talking, you can't actually hear. And if you ask the right question, sit back and listen with empathy and respect and care, a prospect will actually tell you a lot of stuff. So, yeah.
Two ears and one mouth. And
Portion.
the comment about how to sell Cheerios, it's funny because I think some people listening that may be in the demographic of whether they want to be entrepreneurial or start a business, and maybe they're younger, that is actually a masterclass, I think, in like B2B sales, right? Because the consumer eats Cheerios, but it's the grocery store chains, people that carry it to them.
Absolutely.
So CPG B2B type sales, and then you went to Procter and Gamble. At what point did you go from sales? Because you've done sales, marketing, leadership management, like you've done that whole part of the business. So at Procter and Gamble, what made you switch, and what did you do there that was different?
Yeah, totally, totally. So sales was awesome. I was really good at it. I was on whatever, like the fast track at General Mills. So life was great. There was certainly nothing wrong. But I think in my core DNA, I was asking way more philosophical questions about why people buy. Like my favorite thing, the reason I love marketing to this day is because the question of why people make certain decisions versus other decisions is endlessly fascinating to me. So it's like, why do I choose this box of cereal versus that box of cereal? A fractional CMO versus that fractional CMO. This particular, blue jean versus that blue jean. It fascinates me to no end. And really, that's a marketing exercise, right? So if you can get deeply into the psychology of the buyer and understand who they are, what their challenges are, what they're looking for, that's really a marketing exercise. A sales exercise is really also very important, right? Obviously, because you have to pay the bills, you have to close sales and things like that. So as I got in the sales world, I just realized that my core desire was to go into marketing. So when I left General Mills, I went back to business school, and my internship was at Procter and Gamble. And obviously, P&G is a super well-known marketing company. They have some of the best marketers in the world. They basically invented the concept of brand management, which has been replicated, hundreds of times or whatever. So that's really the reason I switched from sales to marketing. And then later, after my corporate career was over, I moved into a strategy role. So I was actually a strategy consultant for 4 years. And that was awesome because the topic was marketing, but it was actually strategy that you're helping with. So if you think about, even in our world, Ross, like marketing strategy versus execution, I always say, like, if you spend more time on strategy, you're almost always right. If you start with tactics and guess wrong, you're probably going to be wrong. You're out in a lot of trouble, right? So like, I'm a huge believer in starting with strategy. So working in strategy for 4 years, I worked with some of the largest companies in the world. They were mostly Fortune 100 companies, and just learning how they do strategy, helping them do that was an amazing learning experience. So yeah, it's a little bit of sales, a little bit of marketing, and then a little bit of strategy. That's what kind of enabled me and got me ready to run my company.
So fast forward from the beginning days of the CPG sales and your intern type period. Fast forward 20 years later,
Okay.
you're out of corporate and you started what is now in marketing, and it's evolved several times in iterations.
Yeah, totally.
And what was the jump from leaving corporate, where you worked some huge, Fortune 50, Fortune 100 brands,
Yeah.
to then taking the risk, taking the entrepreneurial leap? Like what was the headspace? How'd you make the decision, and when did you know it was time?
Yeah, I don't think it was 100% intentional, right?
Hmm.
So when I was in my strategy consulting company, it was a great company. I really had a great experience. It was a confluence of probably two things. I was there for 4 years, so it was a considerable amount of time. I was traveling internationally 2 weeks out of every month, okay? And I was not in my early 20s, like do the math, right? So I was in my late 30s, and I had 3 kids at home. So I was traveling. I was one of those people that you might know, and maybe you've done this yourself or your listeners have done this themselves. I would be on an airplane every Sunday night or Monday morning, and then I'd be back every Thursday night or every Friday or every Saturday, just because I'm traveling to China or going to Europe or going to South America or going to these far off places that sound super awesome and amazing and exciting. But after the 20th one, they're all Marriotts. It makes no difference. They're all airports. It doesn't make any difference, right? So you end up going through this physical toll and grind. And then when you have kids at home, it's like, you know what? I'm kind of missing them. I'm kind of missing my wife. So I knew I need to make a personal change. On the professional side, my strategy consulting company was amazing and awesome, but they were definitely behind the curve on digital marketing. So imagine where I'm sitting. I'm about to hit my 40th birthday. I've got all of this great marketing experience. I've got all of this great strategy experience. But there's this humongous trend called digital marketing that is taking over my chosen career field, and I'm not learning in it. I just knew that email marketing was important and social media is Facebook. And I knew these basic things, right? Obviously, but I didn't really know the guts of it. And so I tried really hard to build a little digital marketing practice inside my consulting company, and it just didn't work. Not because of any big reason. It just there wasn't enough traction inside the business. People weren't hiring us for that, and so I knew I needed to make a professional change. So it was like kind of those two factors at the same time that just said I got to make a change. And then I jumped, but I actually first jumped to take a career break. So I was so busy doing the work, I couldn't process what was next in my life and my career. So I took a little bit of a career break, and I went on what I would call a coffee tour, right? So if you and I were friends 8 years ago or whatever, I would have probably called you, because I literally called everybody I knew. And I said, let's go out for coffee, let's go out for lunch. Zoom was in its early days, so I was like, hey, let's do a Zoom if we're not geographically close. And I just started listening and asking questions about, like, what are your challenges? How are those things going, right? So I trained as a consultant, so I was trained to ask really good questions, trained to really understand all that stuff. And what I realized super quickly is that small and medium-sized businesses, just regular Main Street or tech companies, they are usually good at something that's not marketing. And marketing is full of jargon. It's shrouded in mystery. All these numbers don't mean anything to a normal person. And it's like there's a translation going on that most small businesses are not ready for. So I probably listened to, too many Lewis Howes podcasts or Gary Vaynerchuk, read too many of those books, because I'm a podcast fiend, right? So I was listening to those every day, and he's like, yeah, go out on your own and you can do it and all this stuff. There you go, right? So it's like you hear all these stories and you're like, well, maybe I could try that, right? I think I wrote somewhere that Gary Vaynerchuk is somewhere between 5 and 80% of the reason I went on my own, because I was like, oh, I could probably do this. And so what ended up happening on that coffee tour is I just started getting projects. So somebody like yourself, pretend you're not in marketing yourself. You're like, I have a company and we have this problem. Can you build a social media strategy? I'm like, well, I don't know how to do that, but I'll figure it out. And I figured it out. And then it's like, hey, can you help me build a website? Oh, you could figure it out. So I figured it out. And what I realized really quickly is my skill set and propensity is not technical. That's just not the kind of guy I am, right? I can get the tech, but I'm usually the person that's more client facing. I'll understand the problem. I'm a decently good writer. So I tended to flock towards those things. And then again, very early on, I met some really talented young people who just wanted opportunities and jobs and contracts and opportunities. So I just hired them and I said, hey, you do the email marketing technical side of it. I'll write the email. We'll do the email, start the email marketing strategy, and boom, there you are. You stack up a few of those projects enough times, you build a team that you build trust with, and all of a sudden they start saying things like, hey, I love being your contractor, but I need a job. And you're like, oh, well, I have enough work for you, so I might as well hire you. And then you do that enough times and you're like, well, I should probably come up with a name for this thing. It's not just like my Gmail. Like I got to do something serious here. And so about 6 months later, I came up with the name. So it was like October of 2017. So I've been doing it like 6 months. Came up with this silly name and decided to give it a go. And yeah, it's lasted about 8 years. That's what's surprising about it.
Man, a couple things that I just need to point out.
Sure.
Number one, your story of conception was really similar to mine insofar as I spent just about 3 years ish after I was in the marketing agency, did marketing brand side, went from doing the SEO strategy to like customer success and sales to, marketing department leadership team, and then got through that whole grind. And I was like, I'm either going to go full corporate or full entrepreneurship. And I interviewed at Google and Lowe's, like the Fortune 50.
Wow.
And I was like, this is not it. Like I knew as soon as I walked on campus, I was like, this is not good for the soul. And then I had a conversation with actually a college buddy of mine who was he didn't know at the time, but he was a fractional CFO for like management consulting and finance. And we started a private equity firm. So anyway, fast forward through that, 3 years, marketing and sales there, whatever, grew that thing. I'm in the delivery room for my daughter, who's now the same age as my company. Little foreshadowing. And I'm like doing work calls and emails, and my wife's in labor, and they're like, get off your phone, And I knew at that time, like, this is not going to, I'm going to sacrifice what I want the most for what I feel, for this business, and it's not what I want the most. So at the same time, like you, I was traveling all over the time, and it was like, great experience, great company, still cool with them. Started what I'm doing because of, in my mind, the option to live the U.S. life didn't exist, at least for me in there. And it does now. So
interesting parallel, man. That's totally interesting.
Can relate to that and appreciate that. And we're foreshadowing about the topic of the EOS, which I want to weave in eventually. But I love how you bet on yourself through what you call a coffee sabbatical, if you want to call it.
Coffee chat, just meeting people. I think I called it a coffee tour. Yeah, highly recommend.
Yeah, coffee tour.
Like, there's a lot of people I'm meeting these days, Ross, that are sort of at a career crossroads. It's always a good idea. No matter if you're in corporate America, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're doing something else, if you've got that gut feeling about like, hey, is there something else out there? Going to coffee with a bunch of people that are doing the thing that you think you want to do can be extremely enlightening. It can give you momentum, or it could teach you like, hey, that's not the thing for me. So
at least you'll know.
At least you'll know.
And one of the mentions, I'm going to tie back to Gary Vaynerchuk. I had a brief stint as an MMA fighter. This was around similar time as Conor McGregor's rise, so that UFC started becoming more mainstream. And as someone who's partially Irish, and I had the beard and the haircut at the same time, I would get stopped. Hey, is that Conor McGregor? Like they just boon to the ego. But like I took Gary Vaynerchuk's books very seriously, and like that was how I knew for sure that the marketing I was doing wasn't just because of the brand I was working at. Because I had to market myself and brand myself as a cage fighter. Like it's a marketing agency, essentially, is what the UFC is. Anyway, so Gary V is the reason I started cage fighting.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So anyway, another tie back. But the last one that was so interesting for everyone that's probably there's some people I'm going to guess are listening that can relate to, you're in the corporate, maybe you have a great job, but it's just something else that you don't know what it is. You did the coffee tour. And that you just kind of built it as you went. You had conversations, you got market feedback, you identified problems, you solved problems, and then you realize, okay, happy accident. Now I've got a company. Like now we're in business. So 8 years ago, a lot of things happened in 8 years. Where was the switch, and where did EOS come into play? And also, where did the model of changing from we're going to do marketing like campaigns and essentially marketing agency work, then to fractional CMO work? Like how do those things interrelate?
Yeah, those are totally interrelated, by the way. So when I started the business, I just started it and we added people when we needed people. So there wasn't any framework, there was no science. I'd never heard of EOS, none of that stuff. But I think I mentioned I'm a podcast guy. I also love audiobooks. I have ADHD. I'm not secretive about that at all, right? So I process through auditory learning. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a sponge for books and I love to learn, right? So the business is doing fine. It's not lighting the world on fire. It's basically an agency business that's all centered around my ability to sell and lead the company and then hiring really smart, good people around me to do the tactical work, right? So we built some infrastructure. We were really a flat organization, and things were going pretty darn well. And then the pandemic hit, right? This is where the sort of EOS really starts to happen. So I've been in business for a couple of years, give or take, right? And we were making more money than we spent, than our labor force required. So it was going okay. I was paying myself a salary, but again, it wasn't something that was lighting the world on fire. Pandemic hits, and just to do some rough math, we were sub $1 million, and we lost a $25,000 a month client on the first day of the pandemic. Right. So I remember specifically it was March 13th. It was Friday the 13th. Unfortunately, I had to part ways with an employee that morning. And like literally, that's when the NCAA tournament shut down. That's when all this stuff was happening all at the same time. And like literally, this client calls me and they're like, so they were a healthcare service that is based on being in people's offices. And so they're like, yeah, we just had the next 4 weeks appointments all canceled. And I'm like, what do you mean all canceled? They're like, all canceled. I was like, oh, this is a serious thing. This isn't just the NBA and the NCAA tournament and stuff like that. And so that was a rough day at the office because that was, do the math on the income. And so what I decided in that moment was like, there's an adage that says when people panic, stay calm. And when everybody's calm, you should be panicking. And I think that's like a Warren Buffett quote or misattribution or whatever. And so I was like,
blood in the streets. Yeah.
So I was like, for sure, everybody's going to panic. For sure. That's the only thing I know. So I said, let me take a breath. And I said right then and there, I'm not laying anybody off. These are good people. They have nothing. It's not their fault. None of that stuff, right? And maybe that was hubris. Maybe that was stupidity. I have no idea. But what I said was all of those resources play offense. Write good content. Understand what our customers want. Go find new customers. And then luckily, and probably likely due to some very hard work and some good timing, we rode the wave of marketing needs that happened when all of these salespeople were home for the first time. They're used to being out on the road. They're doing everything over Zoom. And it wasn't the tech side, but it was like, I need content. I need a better website. I need email marketing. All of those things, like in the months after the pandemic, were like booming. And so we rode that wave and built the business a little bit better than ever. Problem was that it came at a humongous personal cost to me. Right? So in one of those, long walks or whatever, I never left my house, all this stuff. I was living in the basement. It's crazy. It's horrible. And so it's like you have this personal toll, plus the business is super busy all the time. That's a massive toll on an entrepreneur and any business leader for that matter. And so I read the book Traction by Gino Wickman, like many other people did. And it finally provided like a framework that said all of this chaos that's happening around you can be quelled because you can follow these very simple principles. And maybe it was because I was a consultant, maybe it's because I love frameworks, but like something about that just struck. But I had significant hubris because I said, oh, I'm a consultant. I can just implement this myself. Great, let's go. So I did it. I brought a team together, gave everybody roles and responsibilities, and just tried to do that kind of like on the side. And it's funny because I say it was better than it was, but not as good as it could have been. And my now integrator laughs because she said it was horrible, right? Like you tried, but it was terrible.
So the integrator now is with you during this time?
Yeah. So what happened is her name is Tina DePrisco. She's a wonderful human being. She's been with me through lots of thick and lots of thin. And basically, she figured out that so I gave her the book because that's what I commonly do with my team is if I love a book, I'll send it to them. And so she said that was the first time that she had ever gotten a term for the job she's done her whole life. She comes in, figures out the gaps, pulls processes in place, glues it all together. Well, that's got a name. It's called an integrator, right? So we tried the process, failed miserably, maybe 6 months of it. It was kind of horrible. Then I met an EOS implementer, phenomenally nice guy. His name is Eric Lynn. And he basically took me out to lunch one day and he said, what the heck are you doing? What's going on here? I said, hey, we're self-implementing. It's going fine. And then he gave me 2 or 3 examples of how having a professional outside helping can make a world of difference. And it totally did. That's it. Done, right? So ended up hiring Eric, ended up going through the process the quote-unquote real way. And anybody who's actually been through the EOS process the real way, it is bumpy. It is not smooth. It is not easy. It's filled with emotion. It's difficult, new behaviors, new rhythms, all of that type of stuff. So we went through all of those types of things, right? And then the journey of the business was fits and starts, a little bit of growth, growing pretty well. Things are going pretty well. And about probably mid 2022, we had a major bump in the road. And I was like at this inflection point, like, what's going on? And what I realized is there's this term out in the ether that's becoming more popular called fractional CMO. And what I realized is I'm a fractional CMO, but I don't call it that, and I certainly don't charge like that. And that was like a real maybe light bulb moments or whatever. But what I realized was I was doing the strategy work for free in exchange to get my team the execution work. I didn't realize the value was in the strategy work. And all of a sudden, I was like, oh, if I change this model, it works. So I started calling myself a fractional CMO, changed the pricing model, got rid of some undesirable clients, got some new clients who really valued the strategy side of it, and something clicked. Then the next step after that was I ran out of time. You can't be the fractional CMO for 25 clients. Obviously not, right? Like 3, maybe 4 is like the limit, whatever the number is. And so I hit that limit, and I started calling my friends from either business school or previous jobs, smart people in my network, and I said, hey, if I bring you a project, will you give me a revenue share? And they're like, heck yeah, the sales is the worst part. I'm happy to do it. Let's go. And so this little practice was born. And so I knew that there were some competitive models out there, and lots of respect to them. They've done a really good job, but there's definitely some holes in those models. Either they don't treat the fractional particularly well, or they don't treat the client really well. The most common mistake on the client side is that you build a big, beautiful strategy with no line of sight to execution, right? But we have an in-house execution team. Or on the fractional side, you either take too much revenue, you don't treat their brand well, you don't allow them to maintain there's all these things that they do. So I said, well, if we build one that's just a little bit better on both sides, we're going to be successful. So fast forward a couple years, we have 55 fractional CMOs in our community. We allow our fractionals to maintain their independence. We have a generally pretty high bar in order to gain membership into our community. Fractionals United does a great job, but they'll basically allow anybody in. They have tens of thousands of members. We decided to go the other way and make it generally difficult to become a member so that we can have a really tightly curated community. So we have a community of people. We provide them tips, tools, training, and then we provide them access to projects. And on the other side, we do demand generation of our own, and then try to go find clients and then act as a matchmaker. So that's the winding tail. And EOS is important to that whole journey, Ross, because were it not for EOS and the pacing and the metric, we would have probably never had the idea to slow down, look at our business, look at the outside world, and realize that there's a better way. So it started off as a rock, right? If you can think about it that simple, it was a rock. What if we brought in other fractional CMOs and changed the model? Well, what if we did this? What if we did it? And slowly, quarter after quarter, year after year, you build this thing that's totally different the other way. So it's, I often say that I attribute my success in my life and probably my marriage and my personal life to EOS, because I don't know if I would have made it through the pandemic. I don't know if my business would have survived. I don't know if my marriage would have survived.
There's so many points I'm going to touch on, but the first one is an identification of the ADHD superpower. Someone that was diagnosed at 6 years old with ADHD, I'm pretty open about it.
Sure.
I was always like, why am I different? Why am I weird? It almost felt like a curse for a lot of times. Like, I could get done with a test in school in 10 minutes and take everybody else 45 minutes. I'm just like distracting the hell out of everybody. And the teacher's like, you're a menace to society, but you've got straight A's and you look like you're not trying. That was like my experience growing up. And then I think one of the things that potentially you can relate to, and I know this is probably true, is high tolerance for chaos, risk, love strategic thinking, swallowing the elephant, so to speak. Just at a bite at a time. Terrible with organization and structure, and rely on frameworks as like heuristics to make decisions faster and get things done. Need an integrator, absolutely. I'm glad that you made that realization too. But like sometimes that fast execution and ability to swim well in chaos, it actually puts you on a treadmill. So the faster you run, the treadmill is always going to win on a long enough timeline. But when you can get EOS as a framework to identify, like, your job's not to run really fast on a treadmill, you're trying to climb a mountain. So slow it down to speed it up and get where you want to go.
Well, the treadmill analogy, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the treadmill analogy is perfect, because the faster you go on a treadmill, you are by definition going faster to go nowhere, because the treadmill sits there. And it's like, the faster you go, the worse it is. So burnout is a huge issue. So nailed it. I mean, like, you just described every report card I had, right? And I don't have the gift of being diagnosed when I was 6. I was just weird. And then actually my son is now 16. When he was in first grade, he got diagnosed. And I said, wait a second, he can't have ADHD. That was a light bulb moment. when I got diagnosed. It's been quite a few years, probably 10 years since he got diagnosed that allowed me to get diagnosed. So
Yeah, it's I call it a superpower because some of the people I talk to, they're just like, I don't know how, and I'm like, you know what? I don't know either, but I know that it is true. And the more I accept it and just lean into it, it's like, all right, great. Like, you're not fighting against your own DNA.
now, so what I believe is there's two things you can choose to do. You can choose to use it as a crutch, or you can choose to view it as a superpower. So when I lose my keys for the fifth time, my wife laughs at me and says, "Yeah, some superpower, right?" But I can also walk at super fast speeds, listen to a podcast at 2x, and remember all of it. So there's probably some germ of something that's going pretty well there. And I think people have a choice. Like, again, two of my kids have ADHD. I'm pretty open about it. I often tell them, like, you may have this, but it's not an excuse. You still have to you still have to do your homework. You still have to be successful. You still have to be kind to people. You still have to do all of these other things. It's not an excuse. So I want to be careful. Like, the superpower thing is great. You just can't take that thing too far.
Right. Absolutely. Know your lane. And then one of the other things that you said too, bringing back to the March 13th of 2020 as like a pivotal time.
I remember.
This was like 6 months into the private equity group that I started, and we were focused on real estate at the time. This was like the Grant Cardone. And my family business, my grandfather and father were brokers of record for a commercial real estate firm. So I was like, once I get experience and you guys are cool with it, I'm going to join the family business and whatnot. So I finally did. And my first ever real estate deal was 218 unit door apartment complex that we had the signed term sheet for on March 13th. And I would have been like the, procuring agent. And I had a marketing consulting thing at the same time where I was doing tactics. Like, I was essentially like helping small business owners with like you said, that just didn't know up from down marketing to do like strategic tactics, like whether it was SEO or website or social media, whatever it was. And they were all like tertiarily around the home services or real estate. So Pennsylvania, only state out of all 50 where it was real estate deemed non-essential, had the best pipeline of all time. It went to zero like that. And then that's where I'm thankful for ADHD, because I got with my partner and I was like, we should probably help other people that are experiencing the same pain, that are like, oh, my business is getting washed, but they still are in business. And randomly walked into the guy needed help with marketing. And I told him during this conversation that we were doing private equity, and he's like, oh, I really want to sell. So my first LOI was during a like marketing interview. And anyway, random story, but like being able to pivot during COVID for both of us, without being able to pivot for both of us, having the flexibility, we wouldn't be here today. I don't think something worse would have happened. And around the same time, so 2022, I also, whether it's crazy the timing, man, because the fractional CMO thing, the growth metrics, for those of you that are not aware, I'm not going to butcher the exacts, but it was like a couple hundred to a couple thousand before 2020, like people on LinkedIn identified as a fractional anything.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And now it's like tens of thousands, if not like 100K-ish. And I'm just like, this is what I feel like I am called to do from a thing. But your model is super interesting because from some of the like the larger, really big, whatever you want to call them, firms for fractional CMO, it's like a franchise model.
Yeah,
you got to buy in like a substantial portion to be part of it, and you're kind of like I think it's a franchise model, or like an employee type thing.
Yeah, so there's typically three of them. I've done a ton of research on this. So it's either a franchise model where you physically buy a franchise and sign a franchise agreement, or a franchise-like agreement, or it's a partner model where you become a partner, you have to buy in again to become a partner, or number three is it's like an employee type of a model. So there's all these different types of models that exist, but they have the same features, but it's usually a pretty high upfront cost to buy in. They don't have that many of the people, and then they get into the model where they have to sell projects to keep their people busy. And that was a very tough loop. So I kept mine as an independent model. So all of the people in my community are tenants, but they're still highly qualified. So that doesn't affect our quality at all. And the process still seems to work. And we're able to cover more industries, more spaces, more examples, and things like that.
But with having 55 people in your network now, a couple of things about EOS. It's like, my assumption and I guess question is, if not for EOS, would you have been able to like analyze the market gap and like say, this is what the org chart should look like? Because it's an incredibly unique accountability chart, which like makes sense. But like, I don't know. You clearly identified like an opening in the gap. Like, did EOS help you to develop that accountability
EOS
chart?
definitely helped, right? I think it's more, yeah, I would say the accountability chart is right there with the quarterly rocks. It's just the cadence is so good. Like it forces you to take a breath every quarter to reassess where you are and kind of reset the strategy. That to me was the best thing about EOS, besides the accountability chart, right? The accountability chart gave me permission not to have to watch everything all the time as a founder.
That's such an interesting take, and I really like the concise answer there.
Yeah.
Um, so, on the topic of EOS, what was like life like after you had the implementer versus when you were self-implementing? Like, obviously, it's night and day difference, but was there like a mental load like off of your shoulders
Totally.
when you had the implementer that you just got to? Because I'm going to have to assume you're visionary, right? It's probably a fair assumption.
Yeah.
And now that you have the space to breathe and the freedom to see, like did you notice things immediately after like the first 90 days with the implementer, or did it take a
No,
lot
it
longer?
wasn't immediate for us. I mean, it takes, what do they always say? They say, oh, it takes 2 years. And everybody says, oh, it won't take us 2 years, but it always takes 2 years. It's because of the bumps that I described earlier. You don't know what the bumps are, but there's always bumps. And so I think adopting EOS was great and there was relief. But what ends up what happened for me, at least, I don't know if it was for everybody else, but like the relief of having to do everything was blunted by the fact that I wasn't really sure if the people who ended up taking those seats were truly the right people. So you have this concept in EOS, which you obviously know, but the listeners might not. It's called right person, right seat.
Yep.
And so it's like right person is, do they have the right DNA? Do they follow our core values? Right seat is, are they able to do that job? GWC in EOS products, are they able to do the job? I always had some unease on that because what we did, like many companies, is we took our team and we mapped it to this accountability chart, but it didn't always work, right? And so
Mm.
EOS, in all its glory for EOS, it doesn't solve that problem. It might expose that problem, but I'll tell you, like, you gotta have the guts as the owner to still do something about it, because you can have somebody sitting in the wrong seat or not be the right person for a long time and either not confront it or maybe not realize it. And it's just like, that's the problem. So it'll expose those problems. I mean, I can think off the top of my head 3 examples of like longer term employees that were either the wrong person for the organization because they didn't abide by our core values or just not competent in their jobs, in their ability to go do it. And we tried to force fit them in there. And I'd say the lesson to anybody is that's not fair to them and it's not fair to the business.
Right.
It's like if you confront your issues earlier, you get to it. Now, had we not, it's impossible to say, but had we not done EOS, would we have ended up in the same spot? Man, I don't know. That's a tough question. I would like to say we probably did not, because EOS would have exposed those things a lot faster and a lot more transparent.
So you've worked on EOS within your own and marketing firm, and you've seen the results. You know the benefit. Now, how do you take that EOS framework in your application to serving clients, right? Because one of the things that for people that are familiar with EOS, as a fractional CMO, I'm like, hey, look, if you know the accountability chart and you see that on the leadership team, there should be someone in charge of marketing, like that's what I try, one of the things I try to solve for is fractional CMO. What are some of the things that you see in 2025 as being recurring challenges?
So for me, because we speak EOS is an awesome filter for us. So if a company runs on EOS, that tells you a couple things immediately. Number one is they are intentional about their growth. I don't believe a company that doesn't invest in marketing, that hasn't invested in marketing leadership, if they don't have a growth aspiration, I often say you don't need a fractional CMO. But because of EOS, you by definition have a growth target. And
Right.
by definition, you probably can't get there. So it's already a good conversation just by knowing that they run on EOS. They're growth minded, they're looking to do things differently, they value outside thinking. So first and foremost, that's a good filter. Second is it allows you to take a language and use it consistently across companies. So we provide training. We don't require it, but all of our fractionals are given training on EOS. They understand the 6 pieces. They understand the formulas. They understand how L10s work. They understand what the acronyms are. So when you go into an engagement, you kind of hit the ground running already. I'll tell you an example of this. So I actually this year took on a fractional engagement myself. It's kind of a long why, but I did it for the first time in a couple of years because I really want to stay close to the work. plus. This example was amazing. It's a great business, all that stuff, right?
Yeah. Mark O'Donnell did the same thing with an EOS.
Absolutely. And they run on EOS. So
Yep.
what I didn't know that ended up being a humongous benefit is that the CEO of that business, they're just adopting. I think they're in year one still, right? And I've been running on EOS for like 5 years or whatever. So what ended up being a humongous value to the business was having a business owner who runs on EOS on the leadership team. So I'll make a comment that I think is stupid, and I'll say something like, "Wait a second, we're looking at this problem about this thing, but shouldn't we look at all of our different business units exactly the same way and have all of the same metrics? Like, why are we singling this one out?" And the CEO is like, "Oh my God, that's amazing." I'm like, I didn't even think of that as like insightful, but because just by talking the EOS way and understanding the principles, you learn that everything is systems and processes. It's either the system and process is in place, it's not being followed by all, or it's the wrong person. It's one of those three problems.
There's a tool for every issue, right?
There's almost a tool for every issue. Right now, again, an EOS is not, it's not exactly drinking the Kool-Aid. It's not exactly perfect in every way. But
Sure.
what ends up happening is when you work with other EOS companies, you just get this natural cohesion because I don't even know that I'm adding that value to my clients, but just by sitting on their leadership team, having this experience of running a company has been really beneficial to them. So I think it ends up being really good from that perspective. I'd also say there's, how do I say this? You don't have to have an implementer to be successfully running EOS.
Sure.
You don't have to run EOS pure, which is, I think a lot of implementers are told to use that term.
Sure.
You don't have to run EOS pure. I have a friend of mine who runs a marketing agency here in the Philadelphia area, and he's adapted EOS for his purposes, and they're doing great. So it's like, you also have to remember that it's an extremely powerful toolkit you can pull from whenever you need it. So I always want to say that because I think sometimes people, especially implementers, see things a very specific way, but it's not always the only way to do it.
That's interesting. One of the things that I love about the EOS tools, just to touch on the tool specifically, is that there's some programs out now that when I started on EOS in 2017, as part of a leadership team at a marketing agency, one of the greatest milestone and gifts that I've ever given by like a president of a company was to like, hey, Ross is in his mid-20s, never did leadership before, let's invest in EOS to like, and, at that time we were running everything off of paper and pencil.
Sure.
The L10s, that was normal. Then we moved it to Google Docs, and that was crazy. Now I use 90IO. Like I've got clients that are on 90. I run my business on 90. And I think it behest of like not having an implementer, like that software is pretty darn good alternative we're at the stage. What do you see AI and these gains in software and tech? Because when you started your marketing 8 years ago, you knew that digital was like on the rise, up and coming, had to do it.
Yeah.
Now I feel like there's like a different .com bubble with this whole AI.
Totally.
What are your thoughts on that as a challenge for marketing departments today and in the future?
To call it a challenge is like calling Mount Rushmore a hill, right? So it's like how do you say it? So I think it's the most transformative trend since the internet, and I think it's actually even more transformative than the internet. It feels like we're still in the early innings, and the impact of AI specifically on the marketing industry cannot be overstated, because what's happening is you're hiring people for hundreds of dollars an hour to do work that can now be done by the person in minutes. And obviously I don't mean go use AI all the time and just blindly use it. Obviously I don't mean that.
No, but there are some things
it's like, why would I ever possibly do that the old way when I can do it so quickly, inexpensively, at a high quality? Mm-hmm. So I'm really, really bullish on AI in marketing, but I'm very bearish on the marketing industry because everything is going to get rethought. And you think of whatever example you want of horse and buggy manufacturers when cars came out,
sure.
Or incandescent light bulb manufacturers when LEDs came out. It's like, yeah, you can still make your thing the way you made your thing, but this is a leapfrog of an entirely different way of thinking about it. And it actually, the emotion isn't important, but it makes me really curious as to what the next generation is actually going to end up looking like, because there's going to be marketing agencies, obviously, but they're going to be way more tech forward. They're going to be a totally different shape, and just seeing what that modifies itself into is super interesting to me. I've gotten to the point where, I'll be very public about this because I tell my team this, is I don't know what my company is going to look like 2 years from now, 5 years from now. Like that future itself is uncertain, because If I was certain about it, I'd almost for sure be wrong. So why try to guess? Like, so it's like we have to figure out what the world needs and then build it, as opposed to take what we have and try to force fit it into the world, because that's just not going to work.
That's the best like one or two liner on product market fit that anyone could ever listen to. So chat clip that, so to speak. Now, with that on the backdrop of the next question,
Yeah.
which is how can a company which has never invested in marketing grow with the right guidance? Like if someone, they hear what you just said and they're like, oh no, I need to start now or else it's going to just run away from us, right? Because what we've always done up until this point, likely in the future, is not going to continue with seamless efficacy. There's going to be some fracture in the market or some disruption with AI. So the question of how can a company who's never invested in marketing, period, like always had the horse and buggy, it's always been fine, how can they benefit from the right guidance?
Yeah, great question. So I would say, first of all, they have to have a willingness to listen and a willingness to grow, and quite candidly, a willingness to be wrong. Because as you well know, but maybe some people don't, marketing is often wrong. I don't get into the world of this is going to work and it's not going to work. I get into the world of is this worth testing or is it not worth testing? That's
Right.
it.
It's an art and a science, and you have a science background.
Yeah, it's an art and a science. Totally right. You can go through all the perfect steps all the right way. Like going back to P&G. P&G regularly has the smartest marketers, the best market research, the best packaging, the best everything, and they still fail a bunch of times when they launch projects, right? So it's like you can do everything perfectly and still fail. So if you think about that as a framework for how AI is taking over the entire industry, what you have to realize is that the fundamental parts of marketing are never going to change. Those are still pen and paper, right? So what are the fundamentals of marketing? Like what marketing strategy is, human beings exist. They have problems and challenges. Companies build products and services to solve those challenges. That could be B2B, that could be B2C. You could be selling pens, you could be selling cereal, you could be selling airplane engines. It doesn't matter what you're selling. That fundamental is the same. And then a company has to prove to that person who has a problem that they're the best solution. Everything other than that is complexity. That's it. Everything other than that is complexity. So you need a person who can come in, who is used to thinking that way, and that's an outside-in way of thinking, have the right tools and frameworks on how to go do it, and then adjust that to the right level for your organization. So one of the things I say to my prospects all the time, feel free to steal it if you like it, it's tell me about the size of your organization and the growth aspiration. Because
right. Always.
The way I would treat a $100,000 company, a $1 million company, a $10 million company, or $100 million company who wants to grow at 5% a year, 20% a year, 50% a year are totally different. And so it's like, if you've never invested in marketing, understanding the business first and then the customer second, and really getting deep into that is where I would always start. Quite often, bad marketing agencies, and Ross, you fired your share of them too, they often jump to, oh yeah, you should go run a Google Ads campaign. What are your keywords? Let's go do that. Let's go build a landing page. Give me $10,000 a month. And you're like, what just happened?
Raj, I know that you never made past, like at one point you were like, I'm going to be a doctor. I love this analogy. It's like, I think that marketing strategy should be take the role of like what a doctor should be, which is like do no harm, proper diagnostic, like run the test, gather the data, and then make a recommendation, which like, hey, I recommend you do X for your health, versus a drug dealer, which is like, oh, you're feeling bad, here's some pain pills, good luck. I sometimes think crappy marketing agencies are drug dealers because they have the stock in the inventory, they peddle it, and they know that like, you know, it's going to get some quick hit of rush or potentially, and they're going to come back for more.
Ross, is that your IP? Did you think of that analogy?
I've repeated it a bunch of times over the last 3 years. You can take it.
I demand that you write a book or a blog post or a LinkedIn post with that theme on it, because dude, that nailed it. That is an exact analogy between a marketing strategist that does things the right way, that's the doctor, and the drug dealer who doesn't do the things the right way, and they're just peddling whatever wares they happen to have in their back.
You know what? If I can take that one step further, you might not have become a medical doctor, but right now you're an honorary doctor of marketing strategy. So you became a doctor just in this framework of an analogy.
I appreciate it.
Not really medical, but maybe, you know.
Maybe someday I'll get sick of marketing. I'll go back to med school. I don't know.
Who knows? Speaking of maybe someday, a question I love to ask people, I've got a quick couple questions left for you. When you're beyond your health, right? When the wheels start falling off as Father Time remains undefeated in every battle.
Yeah.
Whether that's 80, 90, 100, who knows what that age would be. What would that conversation look like with Raj sitting here today with that person at the end of the day? What would you hope to ask them? What would you hope they would tell you? Vice versa.
Oh yeah, I don't think marketing or business has anything to do with that vision of what I have for my life. Like I'm super grateful to have three awesome kids. So my vision for happiness or success, and I don't know why. I'll probably be miserable, but I've always had this goal to live to be 100. I don't know why, right? Because that's really old and you're really fragile and you're probably in a lot of pain. But anyway, that's my goal. I had this goal and I want to hang out with my kids on that day. So that's it.
That's a good. It's a.
If I was so I'm in my late 40s, so 50 plus years from now, if I'm having a conversation with myself, I'm like, right, like, are they healthy? Maybe they have kids. Maybe those kids have kids. Like, to me,
It
those are
seems
much
it
more.
seems simple, but it's the right. I think it's the right way to like.
Yeah,
Sometimes the best goals are like the simple goals.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, so yeah, so like, do I want a certain amount of money? Do I? And none of that stuff matters because like all of that stuff is so temporary. You know, the famous philosophers have said like if you look at yourself in the grand scheme of things, like this marketing company that I run, this awesome podcast that you're doing, the shirt that I'm wearing, those headphones that you're wearing, all of those, like in a generation, nobody's going to remember any of that. So it's like just like live the life that you want to live and live much more philosophically. So I mean, I hate to veer off the marketing path and get philosophical on you, but that would be my true answer. Like that's really the stuff.
So what I went to school for, and what I hope that I am now, I went to school for philosophy. So I
Bang.
want to be a philosopher, which never asked the question how would I make money, but I didn't feel like it was important until after graduation. So I could talk philosophy all day, but we don't have all day, unfortunately. The hilarious part is what I didn't share with you yet is leave a question, ask a question. So
Okay.
the last guest that I had on, not knowing who you were, again, I don't believe in coincidence. The older I get, the less I believe in anything like that. Is why is your goal your goal, and why are you pursuing what you're pursuing? Is it because you feel obligated or because you feel fulfillment? So the backdrop of that answer is perfect timing for this question.
Okay. So why do I pursue the goal I pursue? Okay. So I'll take that a couple of different ways. So this honest answer, fresh. I love the question. So I'd say the first thing is like I often get asked why I became an entrepreneur because people want to wonder should they become entrepreneurs. The best answer I have is I had to. I didn't have a choice. Like it just sort of drew me, and I tried to pull away from it a couple of times, and it just kept drawing me back. So I just became an entrepreneur because I had to, and I had no other choice. I would say within that, like goal setting has always been very, very fundamentally core to me. Like I always like to have a goal, and if I don't have a goal that's either numeric or tangible, I kind of struggle and flounder. I would say what's interesting right now, just in full transparency, I'm kind of between goals right now, right? Like I already achieved the goal of having a business, having employees, reaching certain revenue goals. It's not necessarily my goal to like hit another one of those thresholds. I think now that I'm getting a little bit older and maybe a little bit more philosophical, I think my goals are much more around like finding the kinds of projects that I love, working with people that I really enjoy being around, and really finding a balance. Maybe it's the ADHD in me, but I also have a tendency to get super sucked in and very mentally, they call it hyper focus in our mental space, and
Yep.
that's really taxing. And so right now it's like I'm in a space where I'm super hyper focused on like business and life and the grind and that stuff. So like to me, this is a good moment to say like, why do I keep doing it? Well, right now might be a good moment for me to take a step back and kind of evaluate everything, given what's happening in the marketing industry, given what's happening in the business, given what's happening in the outside world a little bit. So that's the best answer I have on kind of why I do what I do.
Yeah. Okay. This might be a harder question for you to answer. What question do you have for the next person I interview without knowing anything about them?
What is the moment that technology, give me a moment in which technology truly wowed you? And I'll answer that question a couple of examples because I was just thinking about this. So the first time, and Ross, I got some of your years on you. I remember the first time I used wireless internet. I was like, whoa, amazing. Then it happened again the first time I used ChatGPT. I was like, whoa. Like to the point where like you push the keyboard back and you're like, well, that was just scary because it read my mind and did this thing that I was trying to do way better than it. And it's just like, what voodoo magic is happening? Like, I remember this, again, I'm older than you. I remember the first time I used Google. I didn't even know what Googling was, and somebody used that term at work. And I was like, what is that? They're like, you don't know what Googling is? I'm like, no, what is that? And then I Google something, I'm like, holy crap, this is amazing, right? So it's like I would ask the next person, give me a time where technology truly wowed you. How's that?
No, that is a thought-provoking question. Very thoughtful. I'm going to think about that, and I hope the next person has a pretty good answer because there's so many answers that could exist.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Raj, simple, easy question. And for everyone listening, thanks for listening so far. We really appreciate it. Raj, how can people find you? How can they get in touch, learn more about what you've got going on? And if, and marketing fractional CMO is right for them, how can they find
Yeah,
you?
absolutely. Absolutely. So LinkedIn, I'm really big on LinkedIn. I post almost every day, just as you know, Ross. So you can find me pretty easily on LinkedIn. I would also say my website is a great place to go if you want to learn more about the business or fractional CMOs. That's and-marketing.com, and-marketing.com. You can find me in either of those places. Give me a buzz, connect. I'm always happy to learn more about people, meet people, and kind of go through life's path with them.
Very cool. Well, that concludes today's episode of the Thunderstock Show. We had a great, great conversation about the EOS life and all things that have to do with this wild world of fractional executives. For everyone listening, don't run ads in the show. Don't plan to. The only ask I have is if you found some value, share it with a friend. And maybe they'll get something valuable out of it for their life, liberty, pursuit of property. Until next time, be well.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Ross. It was
Raj.
great. Appreciate it.